Now, central to the goal of revitalising the UK on the world stage is the wider Commonwealth, and we have to prioritise these historic relationships. The Commonwealth should no longer just be seen as a nice to have, but as crucial to this government's vision as an outward-looking global Britain.
From CANZUK International, I'm Matt Lavault, and this is the CANZUK Podcast. In this series, we will explore the potential union between Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom. How can this alliance increase freedom of movement, free trade, and foreign policy cooperation between the Commonwealth countries? To find out, I welcome Paul Bristow, a Member of Parliament representing the city of Peterborough, the United Kingdom, and a member of the British Conservative Party. Thank you for coming on the show.
No, well, thank you for inviting me.
So, Mr. Bristow, how did you first find out about CANZUK, and what is the appeal of joining this alliance?
When Britain left the European Union, I think a lot of people were really asking what next for the UK, where's their place? And I'd heard about CANZUK before that, but I really became interested in it post the European Union referendum. See, I campaigned very much for Britain to leave the European Union. And I did that because I wanted the UK to be a much more globally facing country. I didn't want to just tie our influence and our interests in Europe. I've always seen Britain as a global country, and as the world becomes smaller because of communications, because of the internet, because of shorter distances and flights and things like that, Britain really needs to look globally and look to some of its oldest allies and friends, such as Canada, Australia, and New Zealand. We've got so much in common: a shared history, a shared political systems, and it just makes sense for us to do more together.
As you said, post-Brexit, CANZUK makes more sense, but isn't it a good idea as well for the UK to keep its strong relationships between the EU?
Oh, Britain's part of Europe, and Britain will always have friends in Europe, and there's no doubt about it. And what we're proposing by CANZUK, it means different things to different people. We're not seeking to replicate what existed with the European Union through CANZUK. It's just if Britain wants to speak more powerfully globally, it's got to decide what sort of alliances and what sort of countries it wants to do business with. And as I say, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, we have the same political system, the same values, and I just think it makes sense for us to cooperate. That saying, we'll always have very good friends in Europe, not least North Ireland, which is obviously right next door to us, and we share a land border with.
So one of the things that CANZUK is promoting is trade between the Commonwealth nations, but how would trade differ from what is already in place?
Well, Britain is applied to join the CPTPP, which is, I think, a great first step. I think there are far too many barriers towards trade between the UK and our friends in Australia, New Zealand, and the UK. I met with the Australian Red Meat Association. They're probably not called that, but it's certainly the trade association representing, red meat, and there's huge barriers towards trade there. New Zealand Sauvignon Blanc is a huge favourite of mine. It's always too expensive in English supermarkets, and so we can remove those barriers. And as I say, CPTPP is a huge first step in that regard.
And there would be more jobs created between all the Commonwealth nations, correct?
Oh, that's right. I mean, I think trade creates jobs. I mean, you've got all sorts of modelling that says this would happen, that would happen. At the end of the day, what is produced by trade is jobs and opportunity. I remember when I was growing up in West London, I know just moving slightly off trade, just moving on to kind of migration. I remember when I was a younger man, I lived in West London, and it didn't seem to me to be a single pub or restaurant or place I could go to when there weren't taller, better-looking Australian and New Zealand men there to attract women who weren't interested in me. And we just don't see that as much as we used to, because if you are a young Australian, a young New Zealander, and a young Canadian, coming to London used to be a rite of passage for lots of people, especially in Australia and New Zealand, because they don't really have because much more isolated in that part of the world. They didn't have the same travel opportunities, and that's why so many young people in their 20s came to London. And we've missed that because in 2010, the Conservative government were elected, the coalition were elected on the basis of trying to reduce immigration numbers. They couldn't do that from the European Union. We could have free movement of people. And it was our friends in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand who missed out.
And talking about the support for CANZUK within the UK, it seems that there is a lot more support within the Conservatives, but than the Labour Party. Is there a reason for that, or is that misunderstood?
Well, I think we're still recovering from from the European Union referendum. People became very polarised in their opinions in this country then, and the Labour Party were overwhelmingly for remaining within the European Union. And so it just takes that slight jolt, and certainly our Liberal Democrat friends as well, it just takes that jolt to get people to understand that when we talk about CANZUK, this is not a backward-looking thing, it's a forward-looking thing, and it's the UK projecting itself globally. But things are changing because we've got so many members now from the Labour Party, front bench joining our group, the same from the Liberal Democrats. And so the task for the all-party parliamentary group, which I chair, is to try and sell the benefits of CANZUK to all parties and people of all different opinions. And it's a challenge I'm looking forward to.
And are you currently talking to Canadian MPs, Australian, New Zealand MPs?
We certainly are. So we had Ed Fast, who is a shadow minister in the Canadian Conservative Party. Erin O'Toole, as you will be aware, is leader of the opposition, is hugely positive about CANZUK. He made it a key theme, I think, of his election to become the Conservative Party leader. So that's incredibly encouraging. We've got similar conversations planned with New Zealand MPs from the Labour Party, because of course over there there's a Labour government in New Zealand, and so it's them we're doing business with, and the same with the Australian Liberals. Of course, we've got pretty good links with the Australian Liberal Party in the Conservative Party as well.
And between your constituents in Peterborough, are you talking to them about CANZUK? Are they aware of this project?
Well, I don't hide it. It's all over my social media. It's all over Facebook. I even plan to write an article for my local paper on CANZUK and about why that's important. And Peterborough is a global city too. It's got people from all sorts of different backgrounds, different communities, different faiths. We've got such a huge Kashmiri population in Peterborough, Kashmiri Pakistani population in Peterborough. And so I think the idea about forming relationships and trade and otherwise with Commonwealth countries is incredibly attractive to that community as well. Pakistan, of course, is part of the Commonwealth.
And we were talking about free movement of people. Would this mean that a British national could stay permanently in Australia working as a doctor, and that there wouldn't be retraining needed?
I just think this is an incredibly attractive thing for young people. The ability to go to somewhere like Australia from the UK and go and live and work there is something which many young Brits have done. And I think that should just be encouraged and pushed, and so we can learn from one another. I think in terms of what you're saying, they could go there with no training. I think reciprocal qualification recognition mutual recognition of qualifications would be a hugely positive thing. As I say, we've got the same systems in many ways. We've got the same values. And I just think that's an incredibly positive thing. So it's certainly something I'm going to be pushing for, yeah.
So if this gets enough traction with the British public, CANZUK, what would be the next steps for it to become legislation in Westminster?
Well, as always, this is the challenge that the UK faces. It's, the thing that really kind of impressed me about CANZUK is that it's our friends in Canada, Australia, and New Zealand who are actually more positive about CANZUK than we are. And this country, as I say, has been completely polarised by the Brexit debate. And so awareness of CANZUK as a concept is still very low. So it's my job and fellow MPs' job to go out there and promote CANZUK and get it enthusiastically embraced by the UK population. When you talk to them about it, of course they're embraced. It's just an awareness challenge. But for me, I think the path towards this is a stepping stones path. So, of course, Britain's now applied to join the CPTPP. I'll get it right eventually. And I see this as very much as a stepping stone towards CANZUK, because within the structure of that treaty, there will then be opportunities for the UK, for New Zealand and Canada and Australia to work together. It seems natural to me that it will be those four countries who will have the same sort of interests and group together within the framework of that agreement. So that's trade. You've already got the Trans-Tasman Agreement between free movement between Australia and New Zealand. It doesn't take a huge amount of to imagine the UK and Canada joining that sort of arrangement. And on defence, the Five Eyes Agreement already exists, obviously with the United States as well. So we're already cooperating in that regard. Many of the naval vessels and ships and things like that bought by Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the Air Force are actually made in the UK. And so again, it just doesn't take a huge leap to think that we can't cooperate much more on military matters as well as others. So look, all the stepping stones are there. We've just got to plot that stepping stones rather than try and formalise it in some sort of legislative process. What I do want to see, I think would be really, really good, is if the ministers and indeed the prime ministers of all four countries meet together on a regular, formalised basis. I think that'd be huge positive.
So talking about the military, so would there would still be the same armies between the countries, but I guess there would be better cooperation or joint forces working together, I imagine.
Right. I mean, they've all got the same commander in chief and the Queen. So that's and there'll be similar sort of structures and similar sort of operational training and extra will all be very similar between all four militaries. No one's talking about combining their militaries into one military. They will always be separate. The ability to work together, to train together, and do operations together, I think it makes sense. Look, we've got the world is much more peaceful, thankfully, than it has been in the past, but it's still a dangerous world out there, and there's still kind of aggressive nations. Just moving slightly onto trade, for example, China uses trade as a weapon all the time. It's done it against the Canadians, it's done it against the Australians, and it makes sense for countries like the UK, Canada, and Australia to think together. I'd be much more interested in seeing a situation where, if a bit like with NATO, they see an attack against one country as an attack against them all. I just think that would be an incredibly good thing for the UK, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada to do. And I think China would think twice about starting trade wars and other aggressive tactics if all four countries operated together.
And Mr. Bristow, so where I'm residing right now in Quebec, as you know, the official language is French. But do you think that's that would be a problem in forming a CANZUK alliance, or do you think that it doesn't matter about the language?
Well, I'm not sure it matters about the language. I think French Canadians value trade, value the opportunity to travel, value the opportunity for jobs, value the opportunities that CANZUK would bring as an English-speaking Canadian. I don't see that as a barrier at all. We've just got to go out there and promote it.
And some critics will say that, well, CANZUK is just, Britain trying to reinstate an Anglo-Imperial sphere, but would you say that's just a complete misconception?
Of course it is, because four countries will be coming together as equals. This is not a backward-looking thing at all. We're four multicultural, multi-faith countries. We've got mutual interests. We've got the same political systems. We've got the same values. We've got similar economic situation in terms of relative wealth of our populations. It just makes sense to cooperate with our shared history and our friendships. And these are old friendships that Britain has, and there's nothing wrong with renewing old friendships.
And Mr. Bristow, do you think it is a matter of time before all these countries realize the potential behind this project?
Oh, it's coming, and because it's definitely makes sense, because it's good for each individual country. And with approval ratings of above 80% in New Zealand, of 70 plus in both Canada and Australia, and of I think nearly 60% here in the UK, this just makes sense. It's a no-brainer, isn't it?
Before we go, do you have anything to add about your beliefs on CANZUK and what it can bring to the listeners?
I would turn around. If I was a young person living in Canada, in Australia, in New Zealand, or indeed here in the UK, I'd be incredibly positive about CANZUK. This is an opportunity for us to broaden our horizons, to think about whether you want to go work, whether you want to travel, whether you want to fall in love, whether you want to eat a delicious meal, whether you want to watch a football game, whether you want to do whatever it is in each other's countries. The world is getting smaller and smaller, despite the COVID pandemic. People are saying that international travel is going to be stalled. This will be temporary. The world's getting us to be a much smaller place. And the ability to do all these things in each of those countries is just an incredibly positive thing. It's time for our values, Western values, to stand tall and for us to work together for the common good.
Mr. Bristow, thank you for coming on the show.
No, it's a pleasure. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you for listening. Don't forget to follow CANZUK International on Twitter, YouTube, and LinkedIn. And for more information on CANZUK, look up CANZUKinternational.com for more up-to-date insight on the current events surrounding this project. Thank you.